All right, hello and happy Wednesday. Thanks for watching this video as part of your assignment here. So what I'm going to do is go through and talk through some of the information, and then at times I'll tell you to pause it to read or to take some notes. So when I say to pause it, you can, and then you can keep going. So you read a bit about the Davidic covenant in your textbook, but to highlight a few key pieces of it, so David wanted to, ultimately his goal was to honor God, but he wants to build a house or a temple for God. And God's response via Nathan was, don't build it. Your son will build it, and that you don't have to worry because your throne will endure forever. And we know from history that David's throne didn't literally endure forever. However, as you read about with the vocab word about Messiah, it did come to fruition in a Christian perspective that Jesus is that fulfillment, and that Jesus is in the house of David, and now Jesus and Jesus's throne or Jesus's message, legacy will endure forever. And so after King David, Solomon is appointed to be the next king. So it went Saul and then David and then Solomon. As you read before, Solomon was David's son with David and Bathsheba. Their first child had died, who they had had when David had had the affair with Bathsheba when she was still married to Uriah. And then Solomon is their next child, and he ends up becoming the king. So in your bell work, I had you consider, what would you ask for if you were going to be a leader and God was going to help you out? And this is what happens with Solomon. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause, and I want you to read 1 Kings 3, 5 through 14, and then after you read it, you can hit play again. So as you just read, Solomon asks for wisdom, and he wants to be wise, to be able to distinguish what to do and how to respond. And this becomes significant not only because it's helpful to be wise as a king, but it really does become the defining characteristic of Solomon. And even now, when people think about Solomon, they think about his wisdom, or that he was wise. He doesn't always live that out. We'll see. He wasn't perfect, but overall, that's really what he's known for. And we'll see later the book of Proverbs, which is a whole book of these sayings about life and about faith, were originally attributed to him because it's this book of all of these statements about life, and he was considered so wise they attributed the book to him. Okay, the most famous story from Solomon in these books comes from 1 Kings 3, 16 to 28. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause this and read the passage, and then consider these two questions. What's the issue being presented to Solomon, and how does he solve it? And then after you've read the passage, you can push play again. So as you can see, this is an interesting story of Solomon being presented with this issue and saying, okay, cut the baby in half. So I want you to take a look at this painting and sort of see how it's displayed, what's there. And as you consider this story, I do think it's an interesting example of maybe a unique way that Solomon showed his wisdom, that he could tell who the real mom was because of her reaction, even though his initial response is a little shocking, that you can see it showed his wisdom because he was able to figure out the truth when it was hard to do so. Okay, so right now I want you to consider who is someone in your life that you would say is wise. And I want you to write a little bit about this person on your OneNote page and what could you learn from them to incorporate into your own life. So again, you can pause this to write your answer, and then when you are done writing, you can push play. So one of the other things that Solomon is known for is that he ended up really exploiting many of the people to get what he wanted. Some examples of the prophecy that we had talked about before coming to fruition was that he forced people into labor. And one prophecy had said, be careful about a king because they will set them to do his plowing and harvesting. And that's what Solomon ends up doing. And he also charges the people a ton in taxes to help his building projects. And his most famous building project that came about was that he did build the temple. So this was in Jerusalem, and he built what then was called Solomon's Temple. And the temple was a place that the Israelites would gather, that they would were able to hold the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Oops, that says tables. Oh well, tablets of the Ten Commandments, and they were found in the tabernacle in the Holy of Holies. So you can see here it says covenant box, and it had the ark. So this place was considered very, very holy. The high priest would go in there one day of the year to offer prayers. So it was so holy that nobody else could go in there, and even the high priest couldn't go in there that often. And maybe not surprisingly from our learning before, on that day was Yom Kippur, that day of atonement, the holiest day in the Jewish year. And as I mentioned, Solomon paid for this temple with high taxes and forced many people into labor. So it definitely had some negative pieces to it, obviously. But then was, the main temple that people would gather at for many, many years to come. So the last piece here was what happens after Solomon's death. So we know that David had been highlighted for bringing the kingdom together, and then Solomon is the king. But after Solomon's death, the kingdom splits into two. So we have the northern kingdom, which is called Israel, and their capital was Samaria, and they reign and have a whole line of kings, and then end up falling to the Assyrians in 721 BC. And then in the southern kingdom, the capital was Judah, the southern kingdom was named Judah, and the capital was Jerusalem, and that's where the temple was. And this falls to the Babylonians in 587 BC, which should sound familiar to you because that is what we could now call the Babylonian exile. When lots of the scripture was written down, the people were forced to leave Jerusalem and go to Babylon, and it was a time of religious renewal and purification. So after you finish up with this slide and video and you've answered all the questions in OneNote, you are welcome to begin reviewing for your test that is on Friday. Or you're welcome to work on something else that is productive and not distracting to other people. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow for some review games.